talk a little bit about your time at Farmers too, and what you learned from that, and we'll kind of just roll from there.
Yeah, man. The time at Farmers, the further away from it I get, I feel like I can better appreciate the positives. There's a certain amount of screw you, buddy, that comes in when you have a break like that, where there's a shift in your career, especially the way that it was handled by certain people at that carrier. My DM was fantastic. He was a father figure to me. I really miss our conversations and miss that relationship because, as you can imagine, it was never the same after the day I told him I was planning to leave.
Yeah.
But the things that you learn about what the carrier used to do for you, that you now have to figure out for yourself, and the list is extensive, to say the least. So, I may want to complain about ECMS, which was their CRM platform, the internal one. Complain about how bad it is. But when you have to go out to the marketplace and find your own CRM, you realize, well, wait a second. Maybe it wasn't so bad having someone else take care of certain things.
Yeah.
But, the sort of independence cuts both ways, right? There's a lot of freedom that comes along with it, but also quite a bit of responsibility that a lot of folks may not be entirely ready for. So overall, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, let's walk through that process because I think if there's any of the listeners that are maybe in it right now where they're saying, "All right, I might do this thing and go off on my own." What was that like for you, and what were things that really helped you along that process, or if you look back on it, things you might do differently as far as looking at an AMS or this and that?
I think it really starts with planning and thought and mapping out desired outcomes. I'm a big fan of reverse engineering, thinking with the end in mind, thinking about the goal, thinking about where do you want this to go. When we talk about sales and marketing, you're reverse engineering your funnel. Where do we need to end at the end of the month, quarter, year, whatever it happens to be, and then reverse engineer the desired outcome and back our way into the activity. So you asked the question about tech stack, and I think it really comes down to what do we want this to look like from a client engagement, from the UI UX, the user interface, user experience, to use those technology acronyms. What do we want the insured to experience? Because with any technology ecosystem, you have externally facing components, but most of the tech is internally facing. If you think about every single piece of tech in your stack, I would venture to guess that probably 70 or 80% of your tech your insured never interacts with. So being thoughtful about the client journey is really important, but then thinking about the experience internally. For us, and this is going back into the book, so I'm stealing a little bit from my book in Chapter 7. We talk about the 4 categories of technology and this ruthless pragmatism approach to make sure every single piece of tech is justifying its existence in your office. We do this once a year. We call it the annual tech audit, and we basically go back to in the business world, it's sometimes called zero-based budgeting, where we go back to zero and ask all the questions all over again. Does this piece of tech support the vision, mission, and values of the agency? Does it help us do a better job serving our clients? Does it help us drive positive ROI and profitability? Those are the 3 questions we have in the audit. And if the answer is no to any of those 3 questions, that piece of tech is at risk for being cut. So just having that mindset of, internal accountability, external accountability, the external tech is always subject to the client experience, and the internal tech, I feel like, is subject to operational standards, your vision, mission, and values, whatever. But however you do it, just be intentional with it. Whatever you're doing, you're probably better off if you're doing it with a great deal of intention.
Somebody recently asked me, and I love that you brought this up. Somebody recently asked me, hey, what's your end number? Like, what's your goal? And I was just like, man, that's a really good question. And I my mind initially went to my personality, which is, I know if I put a number in my head and I hit that number, my personality is just going to be like, okay, how do we get to the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one? But I think it's important to at least, like you said, even if it's just a goal, a made-up number that you can almost use as like a benchmark and then reverse engineer from there. I think that's a really good point. And, you know, I like to reverse engineer with whether it's like leads I'm purchasing or cold calls or whatever it is. I think that's a really important thing to bring up and something really good to talk about.
Well, no, I think that's all really good points. One thing before I forget about it, James, when you started the agency, and this is just from following your podcast and your story, weren't you a different name when you started originally?
Man, why you got to bring that up? I thought we were friends.
Well, I think it's a good story for scratch agents who may be going through that process of what.
It absolutely is. Let me serve as a warning of what not to do, because I did not put a sufficient amount of thought and planning into the name, the brand, the identity in the marketplace. And we started off as James Jenkins and Associates Insurance and Risk Management. Hands down, the worst name of any insurance agency ever known to man. It was such a mouthful. And the URL was the worst part, honestly, because it was jjairm.com. And if you say it, it sounds like Jerm. And it was like... The first or second time that I had settled on this, and I was telling someone out in the public, I was, at a networking meeting or whatever, and he's like, oh, yeah, I'd like to learn more. It's like, okay, well, you just go to jjairm.com. And I was like, oh, God, I hate that. Why did I do that? No, dang it. That sucks. I hate that URL. And, yeah, it was bad, man. I really wish I would have been more intentional and thinking about the name of the company. Because if you think about it, your name can either be immediately forgettable and generic, or your name can be your, a foundational piece of your sales and marketing plan. It can be a foundational piece of the way that you present yourself to your market.
Yeah,
because
your
with
core
a
values.
really good name, it can become part of conversation. Hey, where'd the name come from? Oh, it speaks to who we are as a company, what's important to us. You'll notice the word insurance is not in the name anywhere. That's very intentional. The name of the company is Risk Well, and our tagline is Life is Risky, Risk Well. And the legs on that thing, it's just huge because, you can literally put it into any application. If you're talking to, a business owner in the contractor space, construction is risky. Risk well. If you're talking to somebody who owns a restaurant, food and beverage is risky. Risk well. And you can literally just swap it out.
Risky.
What's that?
EPLI is risky. Risk well.
Yeah, exactly.
With restaurants.
Yeah, you can swap it out for anything. Whatever you're doing for the name. And I admit it, I'm totally biased. I think it is the coolest name. It has so much relatability. It is immediately memorable. And the inspiration for it was, I read the book from Phil Knight called Shoe Dog, and it is hands down one of the best biographies ever. It's such a good book. But he was talking about the inspiration for where the name Nike came from, because originally they were known as Tiger Shoes, and they were originally in Oregon only. They were specializing in track and field athletes only, and they were manufactured by a Japanese company. I forget what the name of it is, but it started with an O. But they were pigeonholed into one really, really small thing, and they were immediately forgettable. Tiger Shoes. What is that? What does that even mean? But when Phil Knight and his business partner went through this process of, getting ready to scale and blow up, they realized that Tiger Shoes wasn't doing them any favors. So, of course, if anybody who's familiar with the backstory of Nike knows that Nike is the Greek goddess of victory, and the swoosh icon just came in as part of their building up of the brand. That the whole Nike story really is the inspiration for where Riskwell came from, because in the book he talks about how it had to be 2 syllables or less. He wanted something that was 8 to 10 letters or less and 2 syllables or less, and it had to be something that was immediately memorable and iconic beyond just we're a shoe company. So that's really where, we spent months going through hundreds of different options. The finalists were Riskwell and Risk Vantage, talking about like helping you see better, vantage point or whatever. And Riskwell ended up winning. For me, the only mandatory things were the .com URL of the name itself, nothing cute like my Riskwell or the Riskwell or whatever. It had to be companyname.com, had to be available. It couldn't have my last name in it anywhere, and it couldn't have the word insurance in it anywhere. Because, and you guys both recognize this, all 3 of us are high-performance sales professionals. There's something that happens internally, and maybe it's some foolish masculine, pig-headed male thing, but subconsciously I know that a really high-caliber, talented sales professional is not going to be as attracted to working for a company that has someone else's name on it. If we wanted to attract really good talent, we had to do something that didn't have my name on it, because I want the people that we hire to be able to feel ownership of even something as simple as the name of the company, where they can feel like they own a piece of the brand. When they go out into the marketplace, they own that brand and make it their own in every conversation. So I know that's a lengthy explanation, but that's a condensation of several months of planning into 10 minutes or something here.
No, I think that's great, because I love the brand of like Riskwell, that conversation of the last name, all of that, because that was my previous life when my family agency, it was last name insurance agency. And to your point, it was like,
and Steven, hold on real quick. My last agency was the name and associates. So
right.
Go on.
No, yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
But James, to your point, there were people, and we were primarily a personal line shop, that would call up or come in and didn't want to speak to anybody that was not last name X. And so, what did that make the staff feel like? What did, like you said about the buy-in and everybody being a part of the Riskwell team versus last name X? I think it's a very interesting conversation and make really good points there.
Well, because as you're scaling, who do they want to talk to? Well, they want to talk to last name, because last name is in
That's a
charge.
good
And
point,
last
too.
name knows more. Last name knows everything. And especially if they're more affluent, if they're more sophisticated, more successful account, well, I'm going to work with the CEO. I'm going to work with the owner. I'm going to work with whoever the really important person in the office is. But this may surprise you. The vast majority of our clients have never spoken to me, ever. I don't know them. They don't know me, because I'm not their agent. Ashley is their agent. Amanda is their agent. Jonathan, Jennifer, Carolyn is their agent. If I walked in the room, they'd be like, "Who are you?" Like, I'm the guy who owns the company, and they're like, "Oh, you're not my agent. You're just the guy who employs my agent."
Right.
Which is beautiful, man.
So let's back way up to the evolution of the Scratch Agency when you started it, and kind of walk through the process.
That is this podcast. I apologize. Thanks for reeling me back in.
But no, I think that's a great point of where you've gotten to today, to be able to not be the agent for everybody and have the agents set up and be the owner of the business and work on the business instead of truly in it. But let's back up to when you were working in it and we're growing the Scratch Agency, and kind of bring us through that evolution of, James, I'm starting this thing, I'm doing this, and to how you are now. Maybe like when you hired that first employee, or when it was just you, or how that looked like. Let's hear that story.
We started with 2 hires, and this is a crazy story, but when I was a farmer's agent, I had 1 hire. I had a young lady who came in when my wife was 7 months pregnant, and she took over for my wife, who stepped out to be a professional mom. And Monique was on our team for 2 years at the farmer's agency. She put in a lot of hard work, and we made the decision to sell and go independent. And Monique was there all the way up until literally the Friday before we were launching the new agency on Monday. We'd done all the prep work, bought all the furniture, bought the computers, set up all the vendors, set up all the things, everything. And then there was a domestic incident with a former significant other, and no warning whatsoever, Monique quits and leaves our area for her own safety and her own, well-being. This happens on a Friday morning at like 8:30, and we're opening our doors on Monday.
Wow.
Imagine that.
That's a long weekend.
It is a very long weekend. The young lady who I had hired not even a week prior, who I knew her parents, we had some rapport, thankfully, or I don't know how it would have gone, honestly. Hire number 1, 3 days on the calendar before we open. She's green as green could be, knows nothing about insurance. She says, okay, that's not what I signed up for, but sure, I'll give it a go. And then Brecklin and I, if you go and listen to my podcast, she is, after Allison, my wife, she is, I think she's episode 10, 9 or 10, somewhere in there. It's a candid conversation with employee number 1 is the name of the episode. But we talk about the whole process of that first year, that first 8 months, because we launched on April 1st of 2019. We're almost 4 years in business as we record this now today. But Brecklin and I were 2 people, and we wrote $1,050,000 in premium in 8 months. Brand new.
That's awesome.
The only way that happened was, 1, the grace and mercy and provision of Almighty God, and a whole lot of hustle, and a whole lot of long days and long nights and short weekends, and making a lot of mistakes, but learning really quickly. Because anytime a mistake happened, anytime that did not go how it's supposed to, we paused. We what I call capture the mistake, capture the fail. And we would literally sit there and go, okay, what happened? How did this happen? How do we get to this point? What did we miss? What signs did we miss that this was likely to happen? We literally just broke apart the failure, whatever it was, into its components, and we very intentionally decided how we could learn from it and get better. One of the things that my philosophy as a leader is, I don't have any problem at all with mistakes. Mistakes don't bother me at all. If you're trying hard, if you're innovating, if you're driving, if you're hustling, you're definitely going to make mistakes. If you're not making any mistakes, that should be a warning that you're not trying hard enough or you're not pushing the envelope anywhere.
Totally agree.
So my problem with mistakes is when they happen the same way multiple times. Mm-hmm. It's like, he didn't learn last time, so he had to repeat it again. That I have no tolerance for. It's like, we failed.
Yeah.
We didn't learn from our mistake. That's the only way a mistake becomes a failure in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Failure is feedback.
Yeah, exactly. We've all seen the T-shirt, I never lose. I either win or I learn. And it's like, oh my gosh, what kind of Jocko Willink, social media meme is that? But the reality is the heart of that corny little slogan is true. If you capture the mistake, if you capture the miss, well, it's not a failure. It's just feeding the engine.
Yeah, I like that. I have not heard that. Capture the mistake. I just wrote that down. That's gold right there.
Dude.
It is. And
go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, the other day, we were trying to get an account. It was too close to renewal. It's kind of slipped through the cracks. And, my first instinct was, all right, let's just move on to the next one. But I stopped myself and I said, man, let me take a few minutes and figure out what I did wrong. And go back and take some notes and see how I dealt with underwriters and talk with my producer about how we maybe could have contacted with the insured different. And like you said, just figuring out exactly where we went wrong to make sure that it doesn't happen a second time. So totally agree with you.
The challenge that I would make for your listeners is it's really awkward to think about going back and listening to your own calls.
It is.
But if you don't, I have been a huge fan of this since the earliest time I've ever encountered it, back as a farmer's agent. I'm absolutely ruthless and savage with myself. I have to get better at all times. Even now, I've been doing this for a decade, and we've had a lot of success in a shorter time than I expected with Riskwell. Real talk, I had no expectation that this kind of success was going to happen in 4 years. We're about $1.2 million in revenue, and we're on track to increase that by a lot this year. That is beyond my expectations. The only way that happens is if you are always getting better. Every day, every week, you're trying to figure out, how can we improve? How can we improve? How can we improve? You're never going, man, we're awesome. We hit our target. Well, how much room left in the month when you hit your target? Well, that means your target wasn't high enough, or you got lucky, or, there's any number of reasons why. But going back and listening to your own calls, especially the ones that don't go right, you get so much good information out of that. You have to set your ego aside. You can't get butthurt with yourself because, that's a thing. We have to be kind to ourselves. That's an entirely separate conversation. Mental health and the metaphysical, the spiritual, the emotional well-being side of things, that's outside the scope of this conversation. But put a pin in that one, folks, because if you're not kind to yourself, then you're setting yourself up for existential failure because you will burn out. And we don't have time to get into that. But anyways, the whole going and listening to your own calls, I think, is such a great practice because when something didn't go right, of course you got to listen to that call. Listening to the call that went well, whatever. I don't really see a lot of value in that. I'm sure there's value somewhere, but I see lots more value, lots more application in going back and listening to the call that was a train wreck, where you go, I totally bombed that one. They had indicators earlier in the call that I missed. There were buying signals that I ran past and kept on pitching after they already gave me a clear indication they wanted to say yes and get off the call. Whatever the mistake is, going back and listening to your calls is something that everybody should be doing.
Yeah, so funny enough, Steven and I were just talking about this prior to the call. So my producer, when he came on board in December, he was green, no experience. And one of the things I was worried about the most was the fact that the way I learned when I initially joined in the insurance space 11, 12 years ago is I learned from hearing other people talk on the phone all day, every day. The two owners speaking on the phone, how they dealt with clients and whatnot. I've talked about this before on the podcast. So what I've utilized is exactly what you said. All the calls are automatically recorded. So, for instance, if I do, let's say I cold call someone and I book an appointment, right after the call, I go into my folder. I save it into a separate folder of booked appointments, recorded calls, and I shoot it over to Ryan. And I say, hey, Ryan, this is kind of what it sounds like, and he can listen to it. If I do an appointment over the phone with a commercial client, it's recorded, and I put that into a training folder so he can listen to it. And I think that's a good way to help offset being in the office all the time. So we're in the office 2 days a week now, so we've been making it work. So yeah, I think the recorded phone calls are a great learning tool and a training tool.
Love it.
So we're 8 months in, $1 million in premium. What was that next step for you?
Higher. I left Farmers with $212,000. I was $1.4 million in premium after 6 years as a Farmers agent. And for me, the first calendar year was survive and move on. Learn whatever we can. We just have to keep on surviving, because I knew as soon as I got to that first round of renewal revenue, you get to month 13, you get that infusion of additional capital. But I spent every penny of that $212,000 of initial capital in about the first 18 months. And we turned profitable in month 17.
Congrats, that's awesome.
we covered our initial monthly and annual revenue after 17 months.
That's quite the
And,
feat.
Yeah, it almost doesn't sound real to say it, but 6.5 years as a farmer's agent was replaced in dollar amount by 17 months
It's crazy.
as an independent agent.
James, why do you think that? Why do you think that is? Were you targeting completely different accounts than what you were targeting at farmers?
Part of it was we just got a lot better at the process because as a farmer's agent, you're trained to be a robot. And everyone looks and sounds the same. And one of the, I mean, this is only, 45, 60-minute podcast. We don't have time to get into some of the nuance. One of the main reasons why I left was I'm an individual. I thrive in creativity. A lot of our success as a company is because I have good ideas that are off the beaten path. They're not normal, everyday insurance stuff.
Yeah.
I have my own website, my own email address, my own marketing. I have my own logo as a farmer's agent. They didn't like that at all. And the attribution for why this happened so much faster, I think a lot of it was, somehow I had a sense of this is who we're going to be as an office. This is our identity in the marketplace. For us, it was a heavy emphasis on real estate investors and commercial accounts in 3 or 4 verticals. We started off in our first year, personal lines made up probably 25%, and that was the highest percentage it ever got. We recently sold our personal lines book of business in its entirety and got away from personal lines at all. We're 100% commercial and real estate investor at this point. At the end, by the end of this year, we'll do some life, some disability, but it's less than 5% of revenue.
Okay. And what made you want to build a niche in the real estate investor space? When were you like, oh man, this is what I need to target? Did you just stumble upon a couple of accounts to begin with, and then you were like, it opened your eyes to that space?
That's exactly how it happened. I was a farmer's agent, and the beauty of the farmer's contract was if farmers doesn't have a relationship for what you need, then you're free to go outside if the company didn't offer the product.
Gotcha.
And they have the Craft Lake brokerage, which I don't know what it is now, but back then we used to call it Crap Lake because it was awful. But once farmers said no, or you knew they didn't have an appetite, and Craft Lake said no, if Foremost, of course, is part of the farmers' family of companies, if Foremost said no for whatever reason, which if it was more than 4 units or it was actively under construction, there was a good chance you're going to get a no from Foremost and Craft Lake. I stumbled on an account, and the guy had 9 rentals. And at this point, I was still a run-of-the-mill, mostly vanilla agent. I was, mediocre. I was a little better than average, but nothing special. I never would have been qualified to have a podcast as a farmer's agent, that's for sure. But I found this guy with 9 rentals, and we placed him with Foremost, and the revenue on that account was like $2,500 between his home, his auto, and his 9 rentals. It was almost $30,000 in premium. And I was like, whoa, this is nice. I like that. I'd like to make, thousands of dollars in revenue instead of hundreds on every account. And just start sitting down thinking, how do we get more of this? Where do I find more of these people? And I just asked him outright. I was like, hey, you are a dream client. Do you know that? Like, you are the kind of client people build marketing plans around. And just told him straight up, was like, I want 100 of you. Where do I find 100 people that think like you do, that buy insurance like you do? I want 100 of you, dude. And he said, why don't you come to this networking thing? You can be my guest, and I'll introduce you to some friends of mine. Because at that point, I built rapport with him. I was with him like I am with you guys. Very transparent, very just real. There's no fluff with me. It is just authentic communication, and he liked that. So I came as his guest and really had a good time, and the rest is history. And our office now, we average between 150 and 200 new properties a month, and we're 100% inbound. We don't buy leads. We don't prospect for it. All of that comes in the door. Mm-hmm. Now,
I am going to steal some words from Scott Howell right now and say, write that shit down, because that was awesome. I mean, my God, just ask. I mean, that's such a good point. And sometimes we talk about it all the time, Stephen. Like, sometimes it's the basic things you need to do to get to the next level. And I mean, that could really get you to the next level. You're talking to your ideal prospect or something you really want to start targeting. Just ask, hey, how do I meet other like-minded people?
Because when you structure it like that, and looking back on it now, it's accidental genius. I can't take credit for it because I was totally just spitballing in the moment. But when you started by complimenting them and telling them, you're a dream client. When you start that little thing by saying, man, I love having you for a client. You are an amazing client. Where do I find 100 of you? And make it a big number, not 2 or 5 or 10. Make it a big number, something that requires systematic approach. Because he was perfectly happy. We had just met. I didn't even know him in person. Like, I'd never met the guy in person, and he invited me to be his guest to a real estate networking event, like 2 or 3 weeks later. But when you start that thing by complimenting them and telling them they're an amazing client and asking them for more of them, all you're doing is asking for referrals without asking for referrals.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I got some clients in mind. I got to ask that too now.
Yeah, but for the ideal prospect that you're interested in, and that that's
how have we scaled this fast? It's only because we're really focused on the kind of person we want to work with, and we say no a lot. If somebody asks for something that's outside of what we want to do, we will say, hey, you know what? I appreciate the call. Thank you for asking. That is not something we're a good fit for at this time. I recommend you look elsewhere for that. And then stop talking. Don't feel the urge to give them another solution. Say, I recommend you look somewhere else for that. Thank you for your call. Have a nice day. And then you're done. You stop talking and don't take their problem and make it your problem. Because so many people are like, oh, if I said no, I need to have an alternative. I need to give them a solution. And I used to be that way up until about 1.5 years ago, maybe less than that. I felt compelled to give them another alternative because I said no. And looking back on it now, it's like, not my problem. If it's not a good thing.
And that is such a good lesson for scratch agents, because you're trying to get what you can get and get the revenue in, especially in that first year and whatever. But think of, Sean and I were talking about this week, think of the time that you'd be spending on trying to place that risk, whatever it is, with a wholesaler or whatever you're doing, where versus, hey, we're not the fit for you, just like you said, James, we're not the fit, and then go on to doing what you're good at and what you know you can turn over quick and sell. I think that's a great point.
Dude, we can all appreciate this. There are very few things in this industry that make me put my hand to my forehead faster than these things in these groups on social where somebody's like, and it's a template. I swear to God, it's a copy and paste template where somebody's like, hey guys, I need a market for insert obscure risk here. It's like, I don't really do this that much, but I'm reaching for something that I shouldn't be reaching for. Can you guys help me out with insert company selection here for insert line of business here? And it's like, it is almost a copy and paste where I just want to be like, for the love, you have no business taking on that client. They think they're dealing with an expert. They have no idea that your punk ass is sitting here posting in a group of your peers going, what do I do with this?
Right.
I don't know what to do with this.
You got to make a template video, James, that whenever somebody posts that, you just insert video.
You're a slobbering, mouth-breathing commission whore. And it's like, would you have the ethical fortitude to please tell that person, this is not my area of expertise, and I don't intend to use you involuntarily for on-the-job training? Because if you told that insured, I'm happy to take a look at this for you, but I don't really know exactly how to do what you're asking me to do. I'm going to have to do some research. Are you okay with that, Mr. Insured, Mrs. Insured? If you told them that and they said, sure, go for it, okay, if you want to have some on-the-job training, go for it. But 99% of insureds, if you are honest with them and say, I don't have a friggin' clue how to do that, they're going to say, thanks for being transparent. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I know we're getting close to time, so I'll just say, have some courage, and don't breathe your nasty commission breath on somebody because you don't have something figured out to the point that you don't know when to say no. Because the only way you get to say yes to the right things is if you're saying no to the wrong things.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just going to be chasing all these random crap E&S submissions, and you're not looking at the revenue as compared to the amount of time you spend on it. And by the time you get done chasing it, it doesn't matter if you won it or not. You're still not profitable because you spent 3 hours on something that gets you, what, $400 in revenue? When you start looking at the small E&S commercial accounts, you compare them to just bread and butter personal lines, it does not make a dang bit of sense for you to chase a small E&S commercial account. Look at your revenue, homeboy.
Got to
What do you
charge
got,
that
a few
fee.
$100? Oh, but I'm charging a fee. Okay. Okay, so you're $700 instead of $400. And you spent 3 hours on the submission?
Right.
And that's not that much for an E&S. Between all the research, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours for a few $100s of commission. Divide that into your hours worked. Congratulations. You might as well be flipping burgers at McDonald's.
So
I love that.
Well, I want to touch on you selling the personal lines book. So I'm assuming, based on the conversation of doing what you know you guys are good at and focusing on what you want to focus at, that's kind of one of those actions that took place. Tell us about that.
Man, that really hits the nail on the head, because I was lit up in that last segment, wasn't I? I gotta take a breath for a second. Sorry.
We got you off the edge. We pulled you back.
Oh man,
we pulled you back.
I'm a little bit triggered by stuff like that because one, I used to do that all the time, and I recognize
We've
how
all been
damaging it was. Sorry, let me answer your question instead of digressing back into triggered land. It really came down to recognizing what we're uniquely good at, and the whole concept of highest and best use of time and energy. I don't know how it is for you guys in Long Island and upstate New York, but the personal lines marketplace in North Texas, where I am, on the north side of Dallas, is absolutely in shambles. It is incredibly difficult right now. The underwriting guidelines have tightened up in a big way. Pricing is up across the board. Lots of carriers have pulled out entirely. Other carriers have moratoriums geography-wise. And the 5-county area that makes up Dallas-Fort Worth, which is roughly the size of the state of Connecticut, the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area is about the size of the state of Connecticut. That is incredibly difficult. So, there's a few things that happened that we won't go into, but 4 different carriers had bad announcements, either moratoriums or they, tightening up underwriting guidelines, or put us on a performance improvement plan because their retention was so bad because they're kicking out 40, 45, 50% renewals all the time. And, of course, we're shopping those and we're taking them elsewhere, and then the carrier gets pissed because we took the business elsewhere when they issue a 40% renewal increase. And I'm like, you got a lot of nerve coming to me upset, Mr. Carrier Rep. It ain't my problem your dadgum carrier is coming in with crazy increases at renewal. I have a job to do for my insured. If you come in with a stupid renewal, I'm going to shop it.
Right.
Don't complain. Fix your renewals. There's no justification actuarially for a 40% rate increase when someone has no claims. I know that's the law of large numbers. I've got CPCU after my name. I don't need to talk about actuarials and reinsurance and everything. It is really hard to justify why certain things happen in the personal lines world. And everybody is commoditized to some extent in the personal lines world. There are very few value-add opportunities anywhere in personal lines, and just about everybody is price sensitive. Those reasons, in addition to the fact that we're extremely good, probably best in class, as good as anybody else in the country at real estate investors. It was like looking at personal lines, I'm out like Shark Tank. It's like Mr. Wonderful is like, for those reasons, I'm out.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well,
buy
I
personal
think-
lines.
And like kudos to you for recognizing that too, because you could have just kept the small book going or whatever. And I mean that's a good learning point for everybody that's either in their scratch journey or thinking about it. And I think that's a great point to take away.
You know, Stephen, I'm going to say one thing on this because I know you may have some wrap-up questions, and we're getting close on time.
Sure.
You know, it was pointed out to me not that long ago that an insurance agency never goes bankrupt. If you think about it, an insurance agency never goes bankrupt. They either get bought or they just slowly disappear. They slowly have attrition events and slowly stop growing and then slowly just quietly fade away. And they'll eventually sell because there's always, fungible assets inside of an insurance agency. There's always somebody willing to buy an agency or a book of business. There's always a buyer. No insurance agency ever truly goes bankrupt. There's always some other reason why there's a slow fading, quiet death, and then some sort of sale of whatever the remaining tiny little assets are. You might look like you went bankrupt because you're selling at 10% of your value at a previous time, but you never really go bankrupt. You just stop doing the things that you should be doing. You stop growing and eventually quietly fade away.
It's a good point. That is a good point. Well, James, we do look to wrap this up. We hit everybody with this last question. So if you were to wake up tomorrow morning and were faced with the challenge again to start a scratch agency, starting tomorrow, day one, what is something that you would do differently that you've done?
I should have known this question was coming. And there's one of three answers. I don't know which one is best, so I'm just going to very briefly give you all three.
Perfect.
The first one is figure out what the end looks like. What do you want to be at peak? What is the mountaintop look like for your agency? Because for me, I want to be a friggin' monster. I want
there he is.
20, 25, 30 million in revenue.
Trick of James is back.
Yeah. There you go. I want to be an absolute monster. The kind of agency that people that are in my vertical have to be aware of us because we're that dominant in the middle of our sweet spot. It's like, you may beat us, but you'll be aware of us no matter what. That's probably the thing. The first one is be really mindful of what the end looks like. What the peak, what the biggest and baddest your agency ever gets. Be mindful of what you want that to look like. The second is I would have hired more aggressively and moved things off of my plate faster. The most of the mistakes that I've made are a mistake of either a lack of emotional intelligence and being a bad leader on my team, or more than likely, ineffective delegation. Having the right people in the right seats on your bus and making sure that you as the executive, as the principal, are doing the things that only you can do. If your rate is $150 an hour and you're doing $15 an hour work as the executive, you're wrong. Stop it. You should be doing the things that you should be doing. And we talk about activity qualifiers on the podcast and in the book that's releasing in a few weeks. Activity qualifiers, there's three of them, and the fourth option after those three qualifiers is do it yourself as the executive or the principal. And I'm going to limit my answers to these two because I know we're going over time here. The first qualifier is terminate. Should we be doing this at all? Does our office need to do whatever this activity is? Are we obligated to some stakeholder where we have to do this? Is this in our best interest? Does it align with our vision, mission, and values to do whatever this activity is? That's the first filter. Terminate. Okay. Do we have to do it? Yes. Okay. Move on to the second filter, which is automate. This activity that we're talking about, can it be performed by a non-human asset without a discernible drop in quality? Can we have a robot or a piece of tech do whatever this thing is without direct human involvement in our office? If there's no discernible drop in quality, then have a robot do it. Have your tech do it. If there is, we'll then move to the last filter. Delegate. Does it require the executive or the principal's personal intention? Can this activity be performed just as well by a member of the team, or does it require executive attention? That's the delegate filter. And only after something passes the terminate filter, the automate filter, and the delegate filter, only then can the executive or the principal consider spending their personal time and energy on whatever that thing is. So
That's good stuff.
If that would have been installed in my office in the first year, we would probably be 30 or 40% bigger than we are now. I've spent a lot of time doing stuff I should not be doing.
Yeah, man, we've probably all been there before.
No kidding.
Sorry,
That's
I know
good
that's
stuff.
really heavy to end the episode, but
No, it's
that's
good.
something I'm super passionate about, man. That's
It's
so
good.
important.
There was a ton of nuggets in there. We really appreciate you taking the time. James, pitch the book, the podcast, everything that you got going on. Where can they follow you just to follow your journey and learn more?
The podcast, this is something that's in the middle of happening right now. The website doesn't exist yet. We're building it out. Thank you to Chris Langell and our friends at Advisor Evolved. The podcast lives at agencyfreedom.com. You can find us on all major platforms. Just type Agency Freedom in the search bar. And I'm in the middle of building out jamesjenkins.com. That's where all of the stuff for the book and speaking engagements and consulting and whatnot, we're kind of condensing the content ecosystem down to the podcast at agencyfreedom.com, and then everything else I'm into, speaking and books and content and personal blog and whatnot at jamesjenkins.com, and that is under construction right now. So I don't know how far out you guys are on your content calendar, but I would venture to say it's probably not quite ready by the time this episode drops, but keep your eyes peeled for it. I will announce it everywhere once it's live, and you can get the book from there and all the other things. It feels tacky and weird to do this kind of self-promotion, but here we are. I don't know how else to get around
Well, you're
it,
used
you
to
know?
being on the other side. That's why.
I'm used to being on the other side of the microphone, really. So I'm not just like, hey, guys, come to my website.
Oh, man.
So-
Well, James, thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate it. There were a lot of good nuggets in there. You're going to want to go back and listen to that episode. Everybody, that is another episode of the Scratch Agency Podcast. Thank you for joining us. Do us a favor, like the show, share the show, and subscribe. Most importantly, remember to dig down deep, believe in yourself, and own your own future. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening or watching that episode of the Scratch Agency Podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it. We hope to see you next time. If you have any questions, you could reach out to myself or Steven on Instagram or LinkedIn, and we'll see you next week.